My name is Pete Gordon. I'm Head of Emergency Care Improvement with ECIST, the Emergency Care Improvement Support Team. Welcome to another podcast from the ECIST Bitesize podcast series. So today I'm joined by my colleague, Chris. Do you want to introduce yourself, Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Hi, everyone. My name's Chris Green. I'm the Head of Information for the Emergency Care Improvement Support Team.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. So today we're going to briefly talk about the ED staffing tool that you've developed. So let's start off with, give us a bit of background why you developed the tool.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Initially, if we go back, so I spent about 19 years within the NHS, and I probably consider myself to be it's in my induction phase compared to some of the colleagues I work with. But the reason why I kind of go along that route is that a good analyst bridges the gap between data and putting something into action. Okay, data by itself will never prove anything. It will never do anything just by itself. It will never just fix something. It always relies on people to do that. And when I worked at a trust, I worked at a trust for around about 8 years, absolutely loved that time. And I really kind of embedded myself working with the urgent emergency care operational and clinical teams, and particularly just around the emergency department. And working with the general manager for the emergency department, we wanted to have a look at staffing because the anecdotal evidence was that A, there wasn't enough staff, and B, they weren't on at the right time of day, right day of the week. But we didn't really have any kind of hard evidence to kind of back that up. And so just working with them, we were just working through some pretty simple Excel spreadsheets to kind of say, right, well, what variables do we need? What data do we need? Can we get access to it? Which is really, really important. And that's how it kind of came. And if I say anything, I think it's actually become a more simple tool to use. And that's the kind of the essence around some of the modelling that we talk about. And I share this kind of quote with Einstein, is that we put simplicity from complexity. We're taking a relatively complex system within the emergency department, taking on board staffing, attendances, and actually putting it into a simple model that people can get up and running relatively quickly.
Brilliant. And talk us through some of maybe the top 3 things that the ED staffing tool can do and that will benefit for the people listening.
Yeah, absolutely. So the model works off 3 variables and only those 3 variables, and that is by time of day and by day of week. And when I say attendances, that could be any type. So, for example, if you were working with a type 1 emergency department, then you could just put in that demand. If you wanted to then split that by the different streams, and the classic streams of being minors, majors and resus, you can do that. If you wanted to use paediatrics, absolutely fine. The only thing to be really careful about is then moving on to the second variable, and that's the staff that you have in that particular area. Because what we want to make sure is we're counting apples with apples. Okay, we want to make sure we're looking at the amount of staff that are coping with the amount of demand coming through the front door. Now, when we talk about staff, this model is designed to take into account senior clinical decisions. It's not meant as a derogatory thing at all. It's not meant to take away from the invaluable work that registered nurses do, that porters do. This is only designed to have a look at the staff that can make clinical decisions for patients. But the end user, the person who's putting this data into the model, can define those groups. And this isn't a personal thing, so this is a staff group. So how many consultants do you have, middle grades, do you have juniors? Again, you can decide that. And you then input that into the rota tab to then say how many staff are working at each hour of each day. And then the third variable, and probably the most contentious variable, is productivity of those staff groups. And I probably completed the ED model in around about 30 to 35 organisations, and I've seen every type of productivity number thrown at me. I've seen ridiculously high figures, and I've seen crazy low figures as well. What I stress to people is it has to be realistic representation of what's going on. Okay, if I go into an organisation and they say all of our staff are fantastic, they see loads of patients per hour, and then I have a look at, for example, their time to treatment metric, you might kind of say, well, hang about, you say you're seeing loads of patients all through the day, however your time to treatment metric is relatively low, the 2 things don't add up. But it's based on those 3 variables: attendances through the day, staff through the day, and productivity of those staff group.
Okay, and can you, because you've used the tool in, as you say, multiple organisations, and I know it's always people find it helpful. Can you just talk us through one example where it's been used successfully?
Yes, yeah, of course I can. So one model that I helped develop was to support a business case, and I think there's probably one of at least three ways in which people use this for. It's to either write a business case to help with additional staffing. It's either to have a look at just their current staffing, just to make sure they do have the right amount of staff on, or three, sometimes it is just to prove a question. So I worked with one organisation just to have a look at the difference between their locum staff and their substantive staff, and what would happen if they only work with their substantive staff, just to help with the finances and to kind of say, well, actually, yes, we could stop spending on agency, however, it would result in this. But I think probably the most prominent business case I helped with was with an organisation that had three different rotas that they wanted to kind of build in. They had a planned rota, which they planned to have every single day, but because of staff sickness, study, they weren't able to fill that rota. But then they also had a prospective rota they wanted to put into a business case to say, well, what if we were able to get funding agreed so that we could promote more staff? And so we used the model to feed into the demand so they knew exactly how many patients were coming in by time of day, by day of week. But then also to look at the variations between each of those rotas to work out if they were able to get their additional funding, could they more easily meet the demand that was coming through the front door? And I'm happy to say that business case was agreed, in part due to the model, but also in part because they really just understood their. I can't stress that enough, is that the model can't be used in isolation. You need to be able to articulate what is going on in your department, when, and what the variation is.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. So last question. I think, it's already very popular, the ED staffing tool that you've developed, but where can people access it?
Yeah, there's probably two ways in which people can get access to it. So it is on the ECIST NHS Futures website, which I believe the link is going to pop up shortly. And they can also email me. My email address is chrisgreen@nhs.net. And I'll be more than happy to work with any organisations in the development and the use of the model.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. A pleasure as ever to talk to you, mate. And we're going to do another podcast, which is going to look at the bed modelling tool that you've developed. But for now, thank you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Pete.